This is a box of a ZX Spectrum Plus. Somebody gave me this years and years ago, and I don't know why. I think they just knew I collected old retro stuff, not necessarily computers, but it's been sitting in my cupboard for several years. And I used to have the rubber keyed Specky, which I quite liked. Didn't have the Spectrum Plus, and I was more nostalgic about my follow-up computer, the Amiga, but it's all very complete and it's in the original casing. The problem was that only 3 of the keys worked when I tried it out. As said, I've had this for several years and it's just sat in my cupboard. Every now and then I get kind of like, oh, I think I want to fix something. And what I noticed here, this is the keyboard membrane that is not too different from exactly what was in the rubber keyed one. And if we look here, we will see some actual rips in that. So the reason the keys aren't working is because there's no electrical contacts there. And there's some problems here. It's very interesting how it works actually. It looks like the ones from on top have to touch the ones there, and I guess there's a series of like logic gates that basically means you can get any key combination in this many electrical wires. But putting a multimeter along them, there's a whole bunch of breaks somewhere along, and it's not. I can't just replace this with another piece of membrane because that would be expensive. So I'm going to basically wire across the gaps and solder those in and see if I can get it working. I'll try that now. Well, some useful lessons learnt there. What I learnt about this ribbon stuff is you can't really solder to it. It will just burn away, which is why we've got all these little burn marks here. So I could very gently actually successfully solder wires to these, but I didn't go ahead and solder them to the other side because I was like, this is really weak. This is going to come apart because obviously this needs to be able to flex, and that just wasn't happening. So yeah, these don't work for soldering. So what is the solution? Well, unfortunately, unless you've got this particular cable, there's no way you can splice in something else. So really the only solution was a full replacement. And I got this one from a company called dataserveretro.co.uk, and this feels really nice. It's there's a real difference in this. It's got plastic on both sides until you get to the very ends where it's got the exposed wire. There is a bit of an interesting thing in how the Spectrum keyboard membrane works. If you look here, you've got various layers of the membrane come together in up to 3 bits, and they have to work where the contacts have to push against each other. So within the keyboard there are these clamps that have to clamp down on here, and they have to be just the right tightness to get the contact so all the keys work. So that might take a bit of trial and error, but let's get this installed in. This was about £17, which didn't include delivery, so it came to about £19 once delivery is included, which is kind of about twice as much as I'd really want to pay to fix a Spectrum. I could probably pick up a Spectrum on eBay cheaper than that, but odds are it'll already have a broken keyboard membrane anyway. So I thought, hey, I've gone this far, let's spend some money, see if we can fix it properly. So let's see if we can get this installed. In terms of fitting, it's just a case of basically reversing what you would have done to get it open. The sort of the squishy keyboard overlays at the bottom, you then just line up over the holes. Then this thingy, and once lined up we just need to pull the screws back in, being quite careful about making sure that's lined up, which is not at the moment. So here we are with the screws back in, and here's these little clamps I was talking about. So you really need even pressure all across here, because obviously you're talking about keys pushing against a membrane which then have to connect against something solid here, so the pressure has to be even about the same amount. And here's the clamps as well, and what I did is just make sure we had a little bit of slack here so we weren't pulling on them, and those are down, well, hopefully evenly. We have to now plug the ends back in to check. So this is just a case of slotting back into these 2 bits so I can then test the keyboard without having to put all the screws back in it, and we can at least check that's working before we fully reassemble. Well, it took me a while to get a CRT monitor and get this ready, and use horrible flicker, but if you can see, every time I press a button, characters happen. Hooray! Now, the two weirder bits to the story is if I run something pathetic, is I managed to get this thing going. It didn't seem to at first, and I found out whoever had it beforehand loaded the paper upside down, but it didn't work. Thermal printing rules. This tape, which I thought would have, you know, absolutely knackered heads or belts or something, seems to work. It's alive and it's playing Booty. I used to play this back in the day. It's just about the only game I recognised. The most interesting thing I can tell you about this is the fact that getting this sort of sprite movement to actually work is actually pretty damn impressive. It is not trivial trying to get a sprite to move, basically. So they've done a pretty good job. And that's pretty much what I wanted to hook this up for, was to just try a bit of Z80 programming. I've had a little bit of a go and I've got an environment set up on my Mac, and I have to say, because my normal thing is like make some sprites move around the screen, and because of the way it's character driven in the screen, that's actually really difficult. But I'm going to go back and sort that out on my development environment on Mac. I might at some point then transfer it to a tape so I can actually load it on a real machine and see what happens, but that's just a future idea. But for now, the actual thing itself is fixed, and all this somehow still works 30 something years later after I first got one. Although I still don't like the Plus, I like the little rubber specky.